President Donald Trump has just walked out of a courtroom as E. Jean Carroll's lawyer was making closing arguments in the defamation trial. We're working to get a little bit more detail on this.
Apparently, the judge told the courtroom no one in the courtroom is to say anything. There were apparently some counsel objections. From which side? I assume it was Trump's side. No interruptions, no audible comments is the quote from the judge. So now the plaintiff and the defense were talking about certain tweets not in evidence, possibly to share with the jury. The judge ruled that they are not going to use a certain slide that shows the tweets. And then Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, tried stating that something, quote, just need to state something for the record. The judge interrupted and said, quote, you are on the verge of spending some time in the lockout.
Wow.
Ooh, end quote. So that happened a moment ago, and I'm assuming we will see the caravan pull up to Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan.
This is just breaking news. Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, has stormed out of his court proceedings during the Jean Carroll defamation trial, where they are now at the deciding point of how much Donald Trump is going to have to pay for defaming Jean Carroll. According to the BBC, Donald Trump has stormed out of his own defamation trial in New York in the middle of closing arguments. The former president has already been found to have defamed writer E. Jean Carroll for comments he made about her in 2019 while he was president. The jury in the case must now decide how much Trump must pay in damages. Now, this is super important because as Donald Trump stormed out, and you'll see momentarily it's described as being childish. He stormed out in this childish manner. This is not going to bode well for him as the jury deliberates how much he must pay for defaming Jean Carroll. Prior to his swift departure, the BBC continues, Mr. Trump was seen shaking his head as lawyer Roberta Kaplan repeatedly brought up that Mr. Trump had sexually assaulted Miss Carroll. Mr. Trump was found liable for the sexual assault in a separate civil trial last year. The judge in the case said the following. He said, quote, the record will reflect that Mr. Trump rose and walked out of the courtroom. Continuing with the article from the BBC, during Ms. Kaplan's closing arguments, she told the court that Ms. Carroll's reputation had been severely harmed by the former president's comments denying he sexually assaulted her. Quote, this case is also about punishing Donald Trump, Ms. Kaplan said, adding, this trial is about getting him to stop once and for all. She said that Mr. Trump had, quote, continued to defame Ms. Carroll even as the trial was ongoing. A civil trial last year found that Mr. Trump had sexually assaulted Ms. Carroll, a magazine columnist, in a New York department store in the 1990s. The jury also found him liable for defamation for calling her accusations a lie, as he was ordered to pay her about $5 million. Despite that ruling, Trump continues to regularly deny any wrongdoing or even knowing Ms. Carroll.
I don't even know who this woman is. I have no idea who she is, where she came from.
Now, again, the jury is getting ready to go into deliberations, and probably by the time you've seen this video, they would have already convened with their deliberations. This is not going to help Donald Trump's case whatsoever. I'm quite sure this petulant behavior will probably push the jury to award E. Jean Carroll with the maximum punitive damages. According to the BBC, the jury will deliberate after Friday's closing arguments, and the pressure of that eventual outcome has caused significant friction in the courtroom. Before the final argument started, Mr. Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, tried to introduce social media tweets that were not already in evidence, but the judge would not allow it, of course, because the trial is over. They're at the closing arguments. After a fiery back and forth, Judge Kaplan said, Ms. Habba, you are on the verge of spending some time in the lockup. Now sit down. I had to get that last part in there because it's not just the case of Donald Trump being Donald Trump doing what he did, defaming E. Jean Carroll, but it's also the fact that he has a pretty pathetic attorney working for him. Now, this is the result of Donald Trump not having paid his attorneys previously. And because as Donald Trump got indictment after indictment, attorneys began to ditch him, to fire him, and no longer want to represent him, leaving him with the attorney that he now has. But isn't this just picture perfect when you consider who and what Donald Trump really is. I mean, he is a man who his entire life has never been held accountable for a single thing. None of his actions have brought accountability to him. And so in this late stage of his life, at the pinnacle of his quote unquote achievements, he became the president of the United States. But because he had never been held accountable for anything, he thought he could get away with anything. And as the indictments began to roll in, he was haunted by all of the things he had done in the past, including the assault against E. Jean Carroll. That came back to bite him. And now he is paying the price, getting ready to literally pay the price when we get the final amount that the jury is going to award E. Jean Carroll. But Donald Trump could not handle sitting down and being held accountable for his actions. Now, tell me, is this the type of human being who is qualified to be anyone's leader, let alone the leader of the United States of America, the most powerful nation on the planet? Absolutely not. Now, we'll discuss later on how Donald Trump is using the situation in Texas to inflame the border crisis that's being manufactured by Greg Abbott. He's using that to inflame the situation, showing very clearly that not only is he willing to use the power of the presidency to get away with anything he wants to do if he was to become president again, he's also clearly willing to destabilize the United States of America beyond repair, right? Beyond the brink. The first 4 years of Donald Trump was really a stress test of whether or not America could survive someone like him being in the presidency. Now they have adapted. They have adjusted their approach. They being not only Donald Trump, but the circle of MAGA that surrounds him. They've adapted and they have responded to the stress test. They know what they can get away with now. They know that they can commit the insurrection and get a slap on the wrist. And as soon as they get out of their 2-month sentence for trying to overthrow the United States of America on January 6th, they're now all lined up to run for office. So please understand, like, the threat of Donald Trump is clearly demonstrated by this particular case. It's clearly demonstrated by his petulant, childish behavior. The threat of Donald Trump goes far beyond just Donald Trump, but it goes to the entire ecosystem that surrounds him, that he has fostered, that he has fomented, the Make America Great Again crowd. They have looked at everything Donald Trump has been able to get away with, and they have used that as a model of how they are going to undermine democracy going forward. In this particular case, Donald Trump is stuck because he's in a trial where he is being held accountable and a jury of his peers is doing the accountability. And so he couldn't stand that. He absolutely hated it. He couldn't sit there and be told that he had done something wrong. Much like a child has to learn to sit still and accept the fact that you have done something wrong, Donald Trump. Not just to E. Jean Carroll, especially to her, because this is what this case today is about. This is the reason he got up and stormed out of the proceeding, but also in the case of the United States of America. No one has ever told him that he was wrong. No one has ever told him that what he is doing is detrimental to someone else. And if he ever heard it, he simply never cared, because all that matters to Donald Trump is the satisfaction and the satiation of his ego. And if anyone has paid attention to life at all whatsoever, you will know that there's no way to pacify the human ego. Donald Trump is using the United States of America to try to test that theory. He's trying to satisfy his ego at the expense of the United States of America. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe to this channel, Really American, as we push back against this onslaught against democracy.